Why isn't the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer being more supportive of America and Donald Trump in its quest to rid Iran of its murderous mullahs?
Tom Tugendhat is going to join us to discuss the dangers of regime change. This from a man who saw it in first person when he served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Also, Camilla and I will be debating Palestine Action. Should it be banned? Isn't it just what we do in Britain now? We just ban stuff. There's just
it's all too difficult.
There's a wide social problem, so we just find something we can ban. And I just feel Palestine Action is, I suspect, being targeted because it's a means of this government reasserting that it's not two-tier, that it does take this kind of thing seriously. And I'm not entirely comfortable with it.
Welcome to the studio, Tom Tugas. How are you?
Very nice to see you. Look, I've got to be honest, I thought I was in for a nice afternoon, but I'm a little disappointed with the tea.
Yeah, it's not Earl Grey, and we do know this about you. Man of the people will only serve and drink Earl Grey. I'm afraid it's builders. Because
everybody's equal in my office. Everybody gets the best Earl Grey going.
Right.
But that's the daily tea, and I'm afraid...
There you go.
And because we can't serve that, you're drinking it black. You're drinking builder's tea black.
I have actually, the one thing that I was particularly, the reason I'm a Thatcherite, frankly, is when Margaret Thatcher took away the milk from school children. I hated milk. And when she took away the milk, that's when I realised I was a Conservative. So I've never drunk milk.
Also, that's obviously forced you into Earl Grey tea drinking as
Exactly
well.
right.
So we come full circle. Thoughts on the airstrikes on Fordo and other facilities? Do you think this is about wiping out Iran's nuclear threat, or is it actually about regime change?
No, I think it's actually about wiping out the nuclear threat. And you can tell that, by the way, because it's been so targeted. It's been on three particular sites, Fordo and then Natanz and Arak. And the three sites are where the Iranian regime has been refining, enriching the uranium and stockpiling it. So I think it's very focused. I think the comments around regime change are unwise, but I think the decision at this point to seek to end the nuclear blackmail that the Iranian regime has been building up over many years is the right thing to do. I'm afraid I don't understand why our government has been so vacillating about it.
The US administration has been very keen to say this is not about regime change. And then Trump said, why not? And this reflects a pattern, doesn't it, for the last couple of weeks. We thought he wouldn't support Israel in this action. Then he suggested he would. Then he announced that actually I won't do anything for 2 weeks. And then within 24 hours of that, he had joined in the attack. Now, is this, do you think, a carefully plotted disinformation campaign to throw Iran? Or does it actually suggest that Trump is making this up as he goes along?
Look, I'm really sorry. I'm not even going to enter into that on the simple grounds that I have absolutely no idea. And I don't think anybody else does. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a senator, a Republican senator in the US, who refers to this as OMH, one man's head. You just don't know. And the reality is, it's not in that sense, it's not an administration, it's an individual. And so we see what comes up. But I think his decision here is the right one. It may not be for the right reasons, but it is the right one. Because the reality is, I mean, you don't need me to tell you this, you've seen it yourselves for many years, 40 years now, the Iranian regime has been threatening the destruction of Israel. And for at least 15, 20 years, it's been developing nuclear capability. And we know that even when it signed up to the JCPOA, it was regularly in violation of its agreements. In fact, at the end of the last Trump term, it went from refining at about 3.5%, 4%, up to beyond 5%, and it's now up to 60%. And nobody has ever refined it up to, or rather enriched up to 60%, without going for a nuclear weapon. There's literally no point in doing it for any other reason. And then, even when they were called out in May, you'll remember the IAEA report to their board of governors said that the Iranians were in violation of their agreement. When they said that, the Iranian response was frankly extraordinary. It was like, well, if you're going to be like that, we're going to enrich further from the secret site we never told you about, therefore proving again that they were in violation of the JCPOA, the so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This is a regime that has consistently lied and, theologically, defines lying as completely legitimate as well. I mean, it's a very, very difficult regime.
Foreign Secretary David Lammy has been speaking in Parliament today. Let's have a listen to that.
Our diplomats are fully engaged in trying to end this crisis. We can and we must find a negotiated solution. The window has narrowed, but the risks of further escalation are so great and the costs so considerable for Britain and all in the region that this is the government's priority. We don't yet know precisely how far the US strikes have set back Iran's nuclear programme, but there remains the need for a durable, diplomatic solution. Strikes cannot destroy the knowledge Iran has acquired over several decades, nor any regime ambition to deploy that knowledge to build a nuclear weapon. That's why we've been working so intensively with the new US administration to reach a new agreement with Iran.
You said earlier that you think that Keir Starmer hasn't showed great leadership on this. What should he have said, the Prime Minister? Because we have that statement on Sunday morning, 7:30, basically saying, in summary, yes, we're all worried about Iran. We think they're violating international law. We don't want them to have nuclear weapons. But there wasn't any fully throated support of America or the US president. And then we had this strange situation this morning where Luke Pollard, who is a defence minister, is on the broadcast
Minister of the Armed Forces, yeah.
And he's asked by Nick Ferrari on LBC, well, does the government support what's happened? And he's all over the place.
He can't answer the question.
Let's listen to that.
So are we opposing the action taken by the United States on the weekend? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Firstly, let's be absolutely clear. Iran must not have a nuclear weapon. The threat that they pose to regional security is a serious one. And for that reason, the US took steps to neutralise that threat in the past few days. Our focus as a country is on a diplomatic solution now, is to bring Iran to the table, to get them to negotiate a diplomatic off-ramp. We know that they are in a terrible situation. Their air defences are gone. Their leaders are hiding in a bunker. The solution to the crisis is for them to get around the negotiating table, to negotiate in good faith, and to put their nuclear weapons programme beyond use, with a handover of materials so they can be verifiably destroyed, and a de-escalation of the situation so that all the peoples of the Middle East will be able to live free from the threat of a nuclear strike by the regime in Tehran.
Yes. My question was, Minister, is the United Kingdom opposed to the action we saw on the weekend? It's a yes or no.
Well, and that's not one for me to comment on. We've been involved with. But
you're the Armed Forces Minister. Why would you not have a view on armed intervention, as it were, in Iran?
Well, as one of our deep security partners, we keep a regular dialogue with the United States. The US administration has been clear for some time that they were keeping all options on the table to deal with.
Sorry, I mean, it's a simple one, Minister. Are we for or against the American activity on the weekend? For or against?
Well, the American activity has now happened. They're taking those steps to deal with the threat.
What should he have said, Starmer?
Well, he should have said yes. I mean, my daughter wishes for unicorns, but unless you're willing to do something about it, wishes are meaningless, right? If you actually do want to stop Iran having a nuclear capability, you need to do something about it. Now, this isn't just about Israel. I mean, we've spoken about Israel because the Fordo site was specifically built in order to assist the Iranian regime in targeting Israel in order to murder as many Jews in Israel as they possibly can. And by the way, Palestinians too, because although the Iranian regime claims to support them, it's complete rubbish. They're perfectly happy to bomb them, as we've seen in recent days. But the reality is this is also about us. The reason we should be concerned is you look at the missile development over the recent decade. The range of the missiles that Iran is building go way further than Israel. They're reaching as far as London. Now they're not doing that because, they happen to like the weather over here. They're doing it in order to threaten us, in order to make sure that we don't support our friends and allies in the region.
Do they definitely reach London? I'm only going to pick you up on this point because I put this point to the Israeli ambassador, Zippy Hotovli, on my GB News show, and she made that point about these missiles can reach London. Then I got a community notice on X,
yes.
Somebody who perhaps isn't aligned with the Israelis said, no, this is complete nonsense. There's no direct threat to London.
And it does feel a bit 2003.
I'm not saying that they are targeting London today. That's not what I mean. They are developing missile capability at greater range than simply to threaten Israel.
Okay.
Right. Now, whether they're going to target us or anybody else, we don't know. What we do know is that they have regularly said that we're one aspect of Satan, the United States is another aspect of Satan. We're supporters of Israel, and therefore we're legitimate targets. They have consistently said that. Now, you could ignore it if you like. I choose not to. I think the job of the British government is not to be some sort of international legal advisor, as Keir Starmer seems to think, but to offer leadership in defence of Britain, the British people and British interests. And I think the article that Kemi put out yesterday on clarity in supporting this action, I thought was really important. I think Kemi's done exactly the right thing. But I think we should be clear that when our friends and allies are threatened, talking about Israel, but also Jordan, Bahrain, Saudi and others, we should be absolutely clear whose side we're on.
I think if there was a skeptic present, they might say, but no one disputes we don't want nuclear proliferation. No one disputes that Iran is bad. It's the timing of the action which some people are cynical about. Benjamin Netanyahu happened to be domestically in some trouble. The Gazan conflict had been spiralling on for a long time. He wanted to bring America back within the fold and get involved militarily. Iran has not yet developed nuclear weapons. We've been told many, many times that it's within a few months of doing so, and it never has. So is it the timing? Is it this sense that this is a desperate action by the government of Israel to pull America into the conflict, and Trump has jumped on it for reasons of ego or whatever? Isn't that what unnerves people about this?
Well, I'm sure there are many things that unnerve people about this, and unnerves me. Of course, I'm extremely nervous about an action that could lead to the end of the Iranian regime, to the breakup of a state that, as we know, is 70% or so Persian. It's got Azeris, Kurds, Arabs, Sistanis, Gilliks. I mean, you can go on. It's a multi-ethnic state. It is genuinely an empire in its makeup. And so, of course, there's a lot of things to be nervous about. But when you talk about timing, I mean, those are fair observations, but actually I think the key timing is the report to the IAEA Board of Governors in May, where it was made extremely clear that the Iranian government is in breach. And then you look at it and you compare what's been going on. I mean, you can certainly look at the timing of the things you mentioned, but you could also look at the timing of the fact that for the first time in 30 or so years, there isn't an immediate threat to Israel of thousands of rockets from Hezbollah. There isn't the immediate threat of Iranian presence in Syria. There isn't the immediate threat of rockets from Hamas. The only ongoing immediate threat is from the Houthis, and they're quite a way away. So, the geographical situation, as it were, the geostrategic situation has changed as well. Yeah. And so there is an ability to act now in a way that there wasn't before. So I'm sure, if you're going to argue to me that politicians have multiple interests in whatever they do, yeah, right. I mean, 'twas ever thus. That's not exactly news. But why is Israel conducting this action? I mean, I strongly suspect it's because of the warnings of the IAEA. And why is the United States conducting them? Well, you've got a decision to make. Do you want to watch this action end, leaving the enrichment facilities in place? Or do you want to take this opportunity to make sure that they don't come back? I don't honestly think there's much of a choice in that.
The timing could be down to the fact that there is a belief that since October the 7th that Iran and its proxies have been weakened in some way.
Well, and they've proven that they're serious, right? So it goes both ways.
Yeah. But we have to know, don't we, whether this nuclear capability has been completely knocked out.
Yes.
I mean, it's still too early to say. So you've got Donald Trump insisting it's been a complete success. We've then got the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, doubling down on that claim, although the Pentagon is saying it's a bit too early to tell whether these have been completely destroyed.
Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. Many presidents have dreamed of delivering the final blow to Iran's nuclear program, and none could. Until President Trump.
And the Iranians insist that the damage is purely superficial, but then they would say that,
yeah.
wouldn't they? Because they both want to suggest to the world that they are innocents under attack and they're being damaged, but they also want to suggest to the world that but no damage has been done because we're strong and everyone supports us. But I was really struck, Tom, by the report that when the Americans attacked, the Iranians did not fire back. Presumably because they don't have the capability to do so.
Exactly.
Is this state actually a paper tiger?
Well, it's become, I'd be cautious about saying it is. It has become a paper tiger. Look at it over the last 10 years, right? Look at Iranian actions over the last 10 years. You see Hezbollah fighters not only targeting Israel, but murdering quite literally tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people in Syria. You see Iranian-supported groups in Syria and, in fact, in Iraq, murdering, again, tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people in different ways. You see inside Iran itself, the Basij militias, the sort of part of the IRGC, the sort of the on-the-ground troops, if you like, not just beating up women who refuse to cover their hair or murdering LGBT people in the country, but you also see them conducting full repression of students or, closing universities or whatever it happens to be. So it hasn't been a paper tiger. Has it become one? Well, it appears that it's certainly severely weakened. I'm slightly cautious about predicting the end of anything in Iran, but it's certainly in a very different place. What's interesting, actually, and talking to Iranian friends who have family in Tehran, is you speak to people now, and I'm not going to tell you that people are pleased about the attacks. Of course, they're not pleased about the attacks, but more than one person has spoken to me about the fact that it feels like their hostage taker is being beaten up. Now, they're also in the line of fire, so they're not, let's not pretend that this is some sort of joyous thing, but they have no sympathy at all with the regime. And it's a very, it's a very vulnerable moment for the regime, but that may bring its own problems too.
I know, but it's not necessarily the moment that they do rise up, as Donald Trump has suggested, rise up while bombs are raining down on Tehran. That's quite difficult.
Well, it may or may not be. I mean, we just don't know, I'm afraid.
Well, Roland Oliphant made a really good point here, our Telegraph colleague last week. There is no Alexei Navalny figure in Iran. The resistant movement over there isn't joined up. You rise up and what happens? You probably get shot.
No, that's certainly true, but, the reverse is also true, right? I mean, the regime has long set itself against, the legacy of the Shah and the hereditary principle and all these sort of things. And Khomeini has been replaced by Khamenei. There were various suggestions as to who the next Ayatollah would be, including President Raisi was one of the options, and various other people. There was a few people who were killed in that helicopter crash, which really was a helicopter crash. Before anybody gets sort of suspicious about it, even the Iranians don't claim it was anything other. The other day, and so now it looks like the heir to the Ayatollahship. That's not quite the right word, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
Is Mujtaba Khamenei, the son of the current Ayatollah. So the regime itself is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. In on itself, the IRGC is increasingly corrupt. You increasingly hear something that's really quite extraordinary. Younger members of the IRGC in various platforms. You can read it in Persian on various, which it's quite a literate community, right? It's very online. You can read younger members of the IRGC criticising older members of the IRGC for their corruption, for their inaction, and for various things. So you can see that there are fractures within the regime. So I'm not going to predict an uprising or whatever. I'm afraid I don't have that granular level of detail. All I can say is this is a regime that 2, 3, 4 years ago looked extremely solid with proxies all over the place and was able to threaten, including here, as you'll remember, Ken McCullen told us correctly that there had been more than 17 different credible attacks against individuals by Iranian proxies here in the UK, and there was the attack on the Saudi ambassador to the United States, or was it to the UN in New York? Sorry, forgive me, but a Saudi ambassador in the United States, and various other individuals. So, we've seen this expansion of Iranian activity and this level of violence, and it now seems to be being reversed. Now, does that mean it's the end of the regime? I don't know, but it's certainly in a different position.
Can you read these criticisms in the original Persian?
My Persian's not very good anymore.
You got some.
Mine's rusty, actually.
Well, I used to have to work in Persian when I worked in Kabul. So.
Right, well, this is why I bring this up, because you can read and speak Arabic, right?
And my Persian's bad, but I can read Persian.
There you go. Very clever man. And you saw, you did a tour of duty, am I correct, in Iraq and Afghanistan. So you have seen firsthand what regime change looks like. Is that possible? Is that desirable in this instance? What role should the West play in it?
So look, I'm not a believer that we should have a role in choosing the government of Iran, right? I think the Iranian people should have that responsibility, not us. How and what they choose will be up to them. At the moment, it's a brutal dictatorship. They don't have any choice. Those who in any way resist end up in prison. and many of them are murdered. In fact, there is an element in the IRGC handbook, the manual, the training manual for IRGC officers, and their job as the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, is to defend the revolution. It's not to defend the state, it's to defend the revolution. And one of the aspects in there is if you rise up against the regime, you are not just an enemy of the state, you're an enemy of God, and you must be tortured or raped before you are killed. Your death must be extremely painful, and it's there in the handbook. You can read it in Persian, and it's, I'm afraid it's a really brutal regime. You're right about Iraq and Afghanistan. It's hard to argue. It's hard to argue today between Saddam Hussein and today's Iraqi government, but I'm not going to argue that the intervening years haven't been unbelievably painful and horrific. Of course they have. And when you look at Afghanistan, I'm afraid, well, you know my views. I mean, I'm furious and still incredibly sorry about what had happened there. I mean, we abandoned a position and have handed it back to a death cult.
If you're saying that there could be internal dissent in the IRGC and we have an increasingly online younger population, I've written stories about Iranian women and how brave they have been in the face of their own girlfriends being butchered because they haven't worn their hijabs and all the rest of it, and the complete suppression of young women there who are on social media, seeing how life could be different, thinking back to pre-1979, probably with conversations with their own mothers who were walking around in miniskirts back in the 60s thinking, I don't want to be bringing my own daughters up in all this. So with that all in mind, it then leads you to the conclusion that this shouldn't just be about taking out nuclear sites. Sorry, it should be also about taking out the Ayatollah. Now, Donald Trump has quite curiously actually openly discussed this on Truth Social. Yeah, we haven't taken out the Ayatollah yet, but we might. I mean, indeed, that could all be about bringing them back to the negotiating table and some diplomacy. I'm not sure the language from the Iranians right now is about diplomacy and negotiation, Tim. It's more about retaliation, and we are exploring all options, notwithstanding the fact that they might not have anything to retaliate with. But
well, the main retaliation at the moment will be internal repression and violence against their own people.
My point is, does the Ayatollah need to be removed by external forces in order for internal forces to stage some kind of coup?
Isn't that akin to should we have killed the Emperor of Japan after the Second World War?
Possibly.
Is it a step too far because they are a religious leader? They're not. It's not just
I'm
about
thinking
changing
back to Tyrant in his pants. I'm thinking back to Hussein. I'm thinking back to Osama bin Laden. Dead in a ditch.
Yes.
I'm sorry to talk like this because obviously we're talking about the assassination of the supreme leader of Iran, but sometimes that does necessitate change more than an internal...
But it could turn them against you because, as I say,
Yes,
he's not
could.
just a
Yes,
political but a religious leader in the same way that if you'd executed the Emperor of Japan, you would have lost.
I mean, there's some polling that's been done, and it's very difficult to do polling accurately for very obvious reasons, dictatorship, but as I say, a lot of people are online, and with various different elements of encrypted software, you can do it. It's not. I'm not saying it's the same as doing it in the UK or in France or whatever, but you can do it. And a few years ago it was done, and I'm going to get the numbers slightly wrong, but I think it was 72% of men and 74% of women were against the sort of morality laws that insist that women are covered and so on. And of that 72, 74, about 80% of them wanted a secular Iran going forward. They were rejecting the religious government of the theocracy. So I think the public pressure is for there, and you can see, by the way, the uprisings in 22, in 19, 17, and 15, the various different things, and you can see, by the way, that the regime has felt that it had to kill people like Masa and Nika and Neda, these incredibly impressive young women who stood for their own freedom and sadly lost their lives in doing so. The regime is frightened of the change and frightened of that opposition. I, however, am really cautious about us recommending it, and I'm very, very cautious about us getting involved in it. If you look at the history of Iran, just over the last century, Britain's involvement in Iran really started when we went off coal and into oil in the Royal Navy in 1910 it was, when Churchill was First Lord of the Admiralty. That was one of the reasons we majorly invested in, you could say, but actually took large parts of Iran, and we split it with the Russians. The Russians took the north, we took the south. And you see then a pattern of activity of UK and then UK and US activity, including overthrowing the Prime Minister Mossadegh in the 50s, and then various different elements of support to the Pahlavi dynasty right up to 79. And what's interesting is it doesn't even end there, because when you saw the Iran-Iraq war start, funnily enough, the Americans had put an embargo on support to the Iranian regime. But a lot of their aircraft from the Pahlavi era, of course, were still American F-15s and things like that. And they got their spare parts from Israel. Israel was supporting them against Iraq. So, there is a long history here of really complicated relationships. And I think the idea that sort of, putting another oar in to a very, very complex situation, it's 92 million people. There's 10, 14 million people in Tehran. It's a huge city. It's a huge country. And it's got enormous internal tensions already. I'm not quite sure that would be that helpful.
We've mentioned the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. Now, when you were security minister, you had an opportunity to prescribe them. You didn't do it. Today we're debating prescribing Palestine Action, a domestic left-wing protest group. And yet, why is it that the group of people behind this terrorist regime, the British state is so reluctant to prescribe them and call them what they are, which is a terrorist group?
So I'll explain to you the legality of it. I mean, my own view is we should have done it. I wasn't able to do it because the government couldn't reach a position on it. But I'll tell you the government's argument on it, which is that the government does not define states as able to commit terror. States can only commit war crimes. Non-state actors can commit terrorism. Right? It's just a legal choice of language, right? So a non-state actor, Hamas, Hezbollah, whatever it happens to be, can be a terrorist group, but a state can't be. It can only be it can commit war crimes, it can commit various different criminal acts, but it can't commit terrorism. And the IRGC is a part of the constitutional structure of Iran. Now, because of those obstacles, I introduced the National Security Act, which gave enormous powers to the state, to our state, to make it a crime, and a very severe crime, to assist a foreign intelligence service in any way. And the IRGC is a foreign intelligence service. So in reality, the difference between the laws that we now have and prescription against terrorist group are very minor. The reality is I drafted the law so that it basically covered almost exactly the same thing as prescription, but for a state entity, if you like. And so we've got greater capabilities. One of the reasons, by the way, where you saw the arrest only a few months ago, of 8 individuals connected to Iran who were actually out of East Anglia, who were connected to attempting to commit acts of violence here in the United Kingdom. We used that law, the National Security Act, that I was able to get through Parliament to make sure we were protecting the British people, because, you're absolutely right, it is a challenge, but we need to make sure we have the laws appropriate to the task.
One group that has been proscribed today, banned by the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is Palestine Action. And we're going to be debating whether they should be regarded as a terrorist group next.
They just sprayed paint on some warplanes. I mean, clearly it's very embarrassing from the security point of view for the government. And I think that's what the reaction's about.
We have to think about things like the suffragettes. Their history, we actually are not very aware of a lot of the history of direct action.
It would be a new experience for me. I've got to the age of 72, I haven't been arrested yet.
Yvette Cooper has said the government is going to prescribe Palestine Action as a terrorist group. This is the group that broke into an Air Force base and painted on some planes. Now, we're going to debate whether this is right or wrong. I just want to say from the off that what they did was obviously criminal, borderline treasonous, and they should face the usual criminal proceedings. But I don't see why they need to be labelled a terror group. I suspect the government is doing it for 2 reasons. One, because in the past when groups have done things like this and they've gone before juries have sometimes let them off. Yes. So maybe it's a way of getting around that. And the other thing is this will get put to Parliament. And I suspect Keir Starmer is gagging for the Green Party or someone to say they won't vote for it, so there's a proper debate and a proper vote, and then he can pitch himself against them because he's tired of being labelled two-tier Keir. But are we really saying that this group of kids who are desperate for attention should be treated on the same level as Hamas or ISIS? What? And should they face prison sentences of up to 14 years? And given that Conservatives are usually so exercised about the right to free speech, and we're always complaining about people being flung in prison for things they said on Twitter, isn't it a little bit hypocritical for Conservatives to now say, lock this group up?
I'm just going to interject before we hear from Tom. That actually, they're not kids. Why are you infantilising them? We've just seen these protests in Trafalgar
like
Square.
Kids to me.
They look to me to be middle-aged white metropolitan elitist types who come down from Islington. We were looking at the telly earlier. Why aren't any of you at work? They've been moved from Parliament Square to Trafalgar Square because of the idea that it poses a great threat to MPs and peers in Westminster, which I think is fair enough. Tom, do you agree with Tim?
So let me put it like this. When I was responsible for prescription in the Home Office, I worked with an extraordinarily impressive team of civil servants who provided very, very specific legal advice. And I don't know the details behind this because I haven't seen the documents that the Home Office have provided. All I can say is they wouldn't have done this lightly. Now, you saw the other day the Ukrainian attack on those 4 Russian bases with drones, right? You saw the other day the Israelis using drones to neutralize the air defenses that you spoke about in Iran. And now we've just seen 2 of our air refueling aircraft knocked out, effectively, because of this act of criminality, as you called it, in our own country. Now, they say it's only paint on those engines. Is it? Is there acid in there? Has it somehow or other damaged the engines? We don't know, right? We're going to have to look into this. This is, at the very least, it's going to cost millions of pounds, and at the very least, it's going to take a number of days, maybe weeks, I don't know. During that period, our air defences are degraded. Our ability to conduct operations in defence of the United Kingdom are degraded. I'm just saying prescription requires a very high bar.
But shouldn't the Home Office find said evidence and share it with us before it takes this very
There may be
drastic
reasons
action?
why they can't. I mean, one of the problems
Right.
with intelligence is you say, well, why don't you put it to a court? Well, you may have an agent in the organisation. You may have collected it through a system you don't want to announce because, you're not only using it to collect off them, but you're using the same technology to connect off, I don't know, Vladimir Putin or, the Ayatollah or whoever it might be. So you may not wish to put evidence before a court, not because you're wrong or hiding or whatever, but because the way in which you've collected it would then demonstrate that actually you have a reach into, Camilla's phone or whatever it is.
Well, I don't know if anyone wants to see. They'd be bored to death with my parental WhatsApp groups. This is where I think the line is drawn. I'm just thinking I've got some clarity on this. Right. The difference between legitimate protest and where protest becomes political violence is where criminal acts are committed. So even if we look at people throwing orange powder at Van Gogh paintings or trying to destroy the turf at Wimbledon or whatever, it becomes trespass and criminal damage, which therefore makes it criminal and above the bar of legitimate protest. The bar is then lifted again to an act of terror if it involves critical national infrastructure and you are attacking RAF Bryce Norton, which isn't just an attack on a private institution or organisation, it's actually an attack on this state. It is an attack on king and country and those who fight for it to protect national interests and national people. And that's how it reaches the terror bar. Can you understand my point?
I get what you're saying. It's just until I'm provided with the evidence that tells me that this group was doing something any more than what looks like a childish stunt.
But breaking
I'm
into
reluctant
an
to call
RAF
it.
base.
Yeah, but people have broken anti-arms industry. People have broken into things before. People break into things. They do things. They try and stop the movement of things. They lie down in front of things. These are, in some cases, legitimate acts of protest, and other ones criminal. But I think you've got to be very careful about saying that it's actually something that becomes terrorism. And I was just thinking in this country personally that we've gone down the route of banning things. We're banning ninja swords, strangulation porn. We're talking about banning smoking in public places.
Even vaping.
I'm not quite sure all 3 of those are in.
Well, it's a wild weekend. I'm describing it. But my point isn't it just what we do in Britain now? We just ban stuff. There's just
it's all too difficult.
There's a
Let's ban
wide
it.
social problem, so we just find something we can ban. And I just feel Palestine Action is, I suspect, being targeted because it's a means of this government reasserting that it's not two-tier, that it does take this kind of thing seriously. And I'm not entirely comfortable with it.
I tell you what I'd ban. Well-meaning hand-wringers flying the Iranian flag down the streets of London, not least after everything Tom's told us about how awful the Iranian regime is to its people. And the very people who are flying the Iranian flag through the capital are also the ones to be attending all of the LGBT and other stuff and wanting students to be able to think freely. What's wrong with the education of the youth of today, Tom?
I don't know about that, but funny enough, I was looking on Twitter earlier, and J.K. Rowling was attacking somebody who is an activist, an LGBT activist, who tweeted that they were on Team Iran, and I have to say, I mean,
India.
Is that who it was? It was just the most
Willoughby.
extraordinary thing.
Oh, Willoughby. Yes.
Just the most extraordinary thing. It's like you would not even metaphorically, but literally be murdered.
Be killed.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you know, the Iranian state will hang you.
For the uninitiated,
she is trans.
Yeah, she's transgender.
So in fact, she's a rare sexual minority that Iran quite likes because it pressures gay men to become women in order to conform their body to their sexual desire. But you have a right to be stupid and wrong.
You do.
Okay.
And if you didn't, then I'd be in prison.
All right. I hope we haven't been stupid and wrong on this podcast. I hope we've been clever and right. Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Daily Tea and stomaching it all without a cup of Earl Grey.
Thank you very much.